UFC 303 this Saturday, International Fight Weekend. The main event, it is for the light heavyweight championship, the rematch. Jiri Prochazka taking on Alex Pereira, a rematch of their fight in November last year in Madison Square Garden. Pereira has defended the championship since originally winning it against Prochazka in MSG against Jamal Hill. And for Prochazka, he has won his next fight, of course, against Alexander Rakic at UFC 300. So both of these two have fought on UFC 300, and now here they are saving the day here at UFC 303. Originally, again, supposed to be Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler in the main event. Instead, Pereira Prochazka gets the main event. You got Brian Ortega, Diego Lopes in the co-main event, and originally a fight that was Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree Jr. has turned into Anthony Smith versus Romando Dolidze at 205 pounds. Don't ask me how we got there. We'll get to that later on in the video. But folks, if you haven't yet, though, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for some more UFC here on the channel and all MMA. In fact, because tomorrow we're going to have our PFL number 6 here in 2024, event number 6 predictions with the featherweights and the welterweights on the marquee. In the main event, Justin Gonzalez taking on Brendan Loughnane, co-main event. Don't know how that fight got there. Staropoli versus Storley. I don't really know why that fight of all fights is in the co-main event, but it's fine. We got PFL coming at you tomorrow. Last week on UFC, I believe we went 8-3. We went 10-2 on Bellator, 6-5 on PFL. Wasn't our best PFL showing, but still did pretty well in the picks last week. Trying to parlay that into this week as well. Starting things off here, very good fight. Again, it is International Fight Week, so you're going to get a lot of good fights on this card, and we're starting things off with Ricky Simón versus Vinicius Oliveira in the bantamweight division. Again, a good fight to start the card. It is. Ricky Simón, again, a ranked guy, a guy who has lost back-to-back fights, or at one point ranked, but has lost back-to-back fights. A guy who was in a headlining spot 2 fights ago against Song Yadong is the opener here at UFC 303. Again, Simón 8-4 in the UFC. The losses, Uriah Faber, Rob Font, Song Yadong, Mario Bautista, all top 15 guys. Will Vinicius Oliveira join that in his second fight in the UFC? This is a guy who's coming off a win over Bernardo Sopaj in his last fight by 3rd round knockout. Crazy fight where he ended up winning in the 3rd round by flying knee. He won the Contender Series before that in 2023. The fight that I pointed out when I was looking at Oliveira coming into the UFC was a loss to Ali Taleb back in 2022. Taleb, obviously a PFL fighter now, fighting in PFL MENA. He lost in the playoffs last year at PFL Europe against Khurshid Khaharov, the eventual champion. But still, Taleb is not bad, but Oliveira did lose to Taleb back in 2022. He has won 3 fights since then, one of them being against Victor Madrigal, a guy who has fought in Combate before against Christian Quinones and is a winner over Christian Quinones. Where this fight, though, matches up for me, and the really big deciding factor in this fight is going to be the wrestling. You look at what Sopaj was able to do against Vinicius Oliveira on somewhat short notice. Originally, Oliveira was supposed to take on Yanis Ghemmouri. Ghemmouri is a guy who we're going to be talking about later on in this card against Peyton Talbott. He's being thrown into the wolves with that fight later on in this card. But when you look at what happened, again, Oliveira fought well. He beat Sopaj, but Sopaj was able to wrestle him. I know, again, Oliveira had the big advantage on the feet. But when you go into that 3rd round, I remember watching that fight, and the commentators were going back and forth. If this fight is 1-1, is it 2-0 Sopaj going into that 3rd round? That was the conversation Anik, Bisping, and Cormier were having going into that 3rd round in that Oliveira-Sopaj fight. And now, again, it is a one-sided beatdown in the 3rd round. Oliveira really takes over in that 3rd. He ends up getting the finish again late in that round. But the 1st and 2nd rounds, the 1st round is all Sopaj. Sopaj wins it. He goes out there, he gets a couple takedowns. The 2nd round is closer. Sopaj gets a lot of, again, gets control on the ground. You can say he outstrikes Oliveira as well in that 1st and that 2nd. You could definitely make the case Sopaj was up 2-0 going into the 3rd, but again, Oliveira does take over in that 3rd round. He ends up winning it and getting the finish. But again, that's something you have to look at in this fight with Ricky Simón. Again, Ricky Simón is a very good wrestler who is going to ground you. That's what Simón does. Again, Ricky Simón has gotten a takedown in every single fight in his UFC career other than that one loss he had in Sacramento that lasted 45 seconds against Uriah Faber back in 2019. Every other fight, Ricky Simón has gotten multiple takedowns in the fight. That's what he does. He goes out there, he grinds victories out. He goes out there and looks to wrestle, and he's going to give a guy like Vinicius Oliveira, I think, a lot of trouble down there. Because I don't see how Oliveira stays off of his back. I think he's going to be on the back foot this entire fight. Just because, again, that's the pressure I think Simón's going to bring to him. I think Simón's going to give him a lot of trouble in terms of the wrestling. And with all that being said, I just think it's, again, a very tough matchup for Oliveira, especially in your second fight in the UFC. When we started talking about this fight, we listed off the 4 guys that Simón had lost to so far in the UFC. all ranked guys: Faber, Font, Yadong, Bautista. Obviously Faber no longer fighting, but the latter three, again, all still ranked guys at 135 pounds. I just don't think Vinicius Oliveira is at that spot yet in his second UFC fight. I do like his striking, but I think, again, when you look at the matchup, everything to me really favors Ricky Simón. I think Simón gets the job done by unanimous decision by using his wrestling. We go on to our next one here. We are going to the flyweight division. We've got Rhea Tsuruya taking on Carlos Hernandez. Hernandez 9-0, taking on the winner of the road to the UFC in the Japanese fighter in Rhea Tsuruya. Tsuruya is a very solid guy. He's going to be pushing the pace on the ground. This is a very good wrestler who has a pretty good gas tank. And again, just a guy that's going to give you trouble. When you look at what he did in the road to the UFC, it was just a dominant wrestling performance basically in every single fight we saw him in. He is aggressive in looking for the submission. He is not going to be a guy that's just going to lay on you on the ground. He is going to try to finish the fight, whether it be with the choke, a submission, or with his strikes as well. That's what Tsuruya does. I am a little bit worried for Carlos Hernandez in this fight. This is a guy who's 9-3, is 2-2 in the UFC. I thought he lost his first UFC fight against Victor Altamirano, given, yes, it was close. After that, he loses to Alan Nascimento by submission in the first round. He beats Denis Bondar by technical decision, and then he loses to Tatsuro Taira in his last fight by knockout in the second. Hernandez has struggled some with grapplers. That's what happened in his fight in the Contender Series against Daniel Perez. He wins the fight by split decision, but Perez sees all of his success in terms of the wrestling. Victor Altamirano, again, close fight. It is a stand-up fight for most of the fight. But Hernandez, again, barely edges it out. Alan Nascimento was able to take him down and submit him. Denis Bondar saw some success with the wrestling. Tatsuro Taira kept the fight on the feet and outstruck Hernandez. But everything, again, points to the matchup favoring the Japanese fighter here in Rhea Tsuruya making his UFC debut, because simply that's just what this guy does. Yeah, he's got 4 wins by TKO, 4 by submission, but all of those are as a result of the groundwork. And that's what this guy's going to do to you. I think Tsuruya is going to go in here, and I think he will get a submission. I think he does it in the second round. Again, it's just a very tough style of fight that he fights, and it's a tough matchup for Hernandez as a whole. Because where does Hernandez win? Sure, on the feet, obviously. That's where he's going to have the advantage. I just don't think, again, if he's being taken down that many times by Daniel Perez back in 2021 in the Contender Series, Daniel Perez, who is in the UFC now, again, had his first fight in the UFC, lost to Jafel Filo by submission in the first round with an arm triangle choke. But again, if Perez is taking you down that many times, if Alan Nascimento is seeing all that success so easily with his takedowns and with his jiu-jitsu as well, I think it's just going to be a real tough night in the office for Carlos Hernandez. Rhea Tsuruya, again, at 9-0 as a professional. He's going to go to 10-0 with his first UFC victory here in this fight against Carlos Hernandez. Again, if Hernandez is going to win, he's going to have to keep the fight on the feet. I simply just don't think that's going to be all that possible. I think Tsuruya, again, pushes a pace, gets this fight on the ground, and just gives Hernandez hell. We are going to go with Rhea Tsuruya to win his UFC debut, winning the fight by second round submission. To our next one here in the heavyweight division, I would anticipate we are going to see back-to-back retirements with these next 2 fights. The first one being Andrei Arlovski versus Martin Buday. Why do I think this, especially with Arlovski, is because this fight was originally scheduled to be on Perez Taira a week ago. It got moved to this date instead. I would think if this is Andrei Arlovski's final fight, again, future UFC Hall of Famer, former world champion. He's, again, had so many fights in the UFC. This will be walk number, if I could do math, 42 for Andrei Arlovski in this fight. It is crazy how many fights he has had. This will be number 42 for him in the UFC. Again, as a professional, the man has had 1 million fights. If I can do my math again very quickly, the guy has had 59 professional mixed martial arts bouts. This will be his 60th professional MMA fight, and it feels like this is the one he is going out on. Again, he is on a 3-fight losing streak, and again, they didn't want him to retire in the warehouse that is the UFC Apex. Instead, they are going to give him, again, the send-off. Sort of similar what they did with Donald Cowboy Cerrone last year on International Fight Week, what they did with Robbie Lawler. Actually, was the Cowboy one 2 years ago now? It might have, no. I don't know. Because Lawler and him retired on different dates, but I think Lawler retired on International Fight Week. When did I got to check this real quick. When did Cowboy retire? I remember, I think it was in Vegas, but that wasn't International Fight Week. That was last year though, right? That was 2 years ago now. Wow, okay, that was International Fight Week. So yeah, similar to how Cowboy retired and how Robbie Lawler retired, they both retired on International Fight Week in the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. I feel like this is what's happening with Arlovski. Again, 60 professional fights, that's a lot. Now, when we look at this through a fight perspective, he's taken on Martin Buday, who I don't think is very good, okay? Buday came into the UFC, he beat Chris Barnett, okay. He beats Lucas Brzeski. I really thought he lost the fight, but he wins it in San Diego. He gets by Jake Collier. He beats Josh Parisian in probably his best performance in the UFC, where he submits him in the first round. And he just gets dominated by Shamil Gaziev in his last fight. Now, again, we've seen Gaziev in a main event since that. He lost, of course, to Biggie Boy Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and Rozenstruik's going to get Tai Tuivasa, UFC 305 in Australia. I think it's a really interesting fight. I think Rozenstruik probably wins that fight. Just as I'm looking at it right now, we'll see again once we get there in mid-August. But still, Buday gets just manhandled by Gaziev in that fight at UFC 296 just in December. It's all Gaziev in that fight. He ends up getting the finish early in that second round. Now, does Andrei Arlovski possess that hard-hitting power that he once did? No, he doesn't. Again, Andrei Arlovski has really turned into more of just a point fighter as of late, and really that's what he's been the latter half of his career in the UFC. Again, the last time Andrei Arlovski got a finish in the UFC was all the way back at UFC 187, and that was the first Rumble Johnson-Daniel Cormier fight where he finished Travis Brown in the first round. Again, it's been that long since Arlovski has gotten a finish. He has been finished in his own right, but most of Arlovski's wins have been by decision, and we've talked about it throughout through COVID and since with Arlovski. It's just has been his ability to beat these up-and-coming guys by decision and just outpoint them. Now, if you beat Arlovski, it used to be, if you beat Arlovski, you were destined for the top 10. And I'm looking at guys like Augusto Sakai, who at one point, yes, was a top 10 guy fighting in main events. Jairzinho Rozenstruik, who's still in the top 10, and Tom Aspinall. Those are the guys at the time who beat Arlovski, and again, that was the test. If you could beat Arlovski, you were ready for the top 10, but he turned so many guys down in the process as well. You look at Felipe Lins, Tanner Boser, Chase Sherman, Carlos Felipe, Jared Vanderaa, Jake Collier. 6 guys that, again, were middling heavyweights that Andrei Arlovski turned away and beat by decision. But since then, since that Collier win, he's lost 3 in a row. It's a submission loss to Marcos Rodrigo de Lima. It's a loss to Dontel Mays by knockout, and most recently, it's a decision loss earlier in 2024 to Waldo Cortez Acosta. Now here he is against Martin Buday. It's going to be a striking fight. I'm not impressed with Buday's striking at all, but still, I'm going to take him over a 45-year-old Andrei Arlovski who has looked like a shell of his point fighting self recently. Again, Arlovski's fought a lot different as of late, really since 2018, 2015, right? Was Rumble Johnson DC? I said that earlier. Was it 2015? It was 2015. My goodness, that's been that long. Anyways, that's just how he's fought recently, yes. But again, like, he has been better at that, but he's been, as of those last 3 fights, it's been a different Arlovski. He's really shown his age. Again, the guy's 45 years old. I think Buday wins. Do I think Buday gets a finish? No, I don't think Buday hits very hard. I think Buday's best shot to get a finish is on the ground. I don't think he does it. Yes, again, Arlovski's shin is iffy. But I think we just kind of see a point fighting style of fight here, and Buday wins it by decision. I don't think, again, I think Arlovski will be in the fight. I think, again, I don't think he gets finished. I think it's a somewhat close fight, but I just think Buday does enough to win. So give me Martin Buday to win the fight here by unanimous decision as we go into our next fight here with another fighter who I think will be retiring, Michelle Waterson-Gomez. Again, it just makes sense. They're back-to-back on this card. Again, originally supposed to be a Conor card, so, big audience, but still, it is a big audience, International Fight Week. Michelle Waterson, at 38 years of age, takes on Jillian Robertson, and Michelle Waterson has not won a fight in over 3 years. She's lost 4 in a row, taking on Jillian Robertson. Waterson finds herself at around a plus 165 dog. Robertson finds herself at a minus 2-1 favorite. It again makes sense if Waterson did retire after this fight. Again, she has not won a fight recently. I thought she beat Luana Pinheiro, but that's neither here or there. She loses to Marina Rodriguez. She loses to Amanda Lemos. She loses to Luana Pinheiro, and they have her fight Marina Rodriguez again, and she gets finished in the second round. She's now taking on Jillian Robertson, which is somewhat of a different stylistic matchup than the last couple of fighters she's fought, because in those last, 5 fights, if you include her main event win over Angela Hill, her last win, she's been the one getting the takedowns, and she's been the one being the aggressor in the wrestling game. And now, I think Waterson has been screwed in a couple fights. Now, a lot of people thought Angela Hill beat her in the main event. I actually thought Waterson won that fight. I did. But I thought she got screwed in the Carla Esparza fight at 249 in Jacksonville. I thought she got screwed in the Pinheiro fight in Miami. But again, that's neither here or there. This is her last fight. Regardless of how you see those fights, yeah, Waterson's not been the same fighter. Now, again, it is a different stylistic fight because that's just what Jillian Robertson is. Robertson's a grappler. She's looking to get fights down. I just think, again, Robertson's a better grappler. And again, you look at the record of Robertson, you see 13-8. Yeah, it's not the best. But still, I think Robertson is better than Michelle Waterson at this point. Again, Waterson's 38 years old. She's not getting any younger. She has not been the same fighter she once was. I think Robertson goes out here. I think she probably gets a finish. I'm going to take Jillian Robertson to win the fight by second round sub. Yes, the same exact prediction we had for Rhea Tsuruya earlier in our other flyweight bout. Sorry, this fight's at 15 anyways. But in our flyweight bout earlier, I do think Robertson gets the finish in the second round by submission. You got to question again, how involved is Waterson truly in this? How involved is she truly in with the sport at this point in her career? She's lost 4 in a row. She's not making the run for the belt. She has fallen off incredibly after Waterson went on her little run where, she had a main event spot against Joanna Jędrzejczyk where if she won, she would have been fighting for a championship. She has not been the same fighter since that. Where is she truly at this point? Everything points to Jillian Robertson, who, again, feels like she's been around for a very long time. She's had 16 bouts in the UFC. She's only 29 years old. Robertson is still young. She is still evolving as a mixed martial arts fighter, and you just have seen what she's been able to do recently. Her Polyana Viana victory is very good. Her win over Maria Agapova is good. I even like the win over Piera Rodriguez as well, where she's able to get a submission in Kansas City. Yes, the loss to Talbott Ricci's there, but Ricci's pretty solid in her own right, and really just canceled out a lot of what the offensive game of Jillian Robertson is. I think Robertson beats Michelle Waterson-Gomez. I think the karate hottie now retires. Again, she'll be 18-13, coming off 5 straight losses. I really don't see a better place for her to retire other than right now at UFC 303, again, in T-Mobile International Fight Week. It just makes sense. Win or lose, maybe. I think if Waterson does win, could actually see her sticking around because Robertson is a fighter who is around the top 15/top 10 of the weight class. But I don't think Waterson wins this fight. I think stylistically it's a bad matchup for her. And again, Robertson does very well at what her offensive game is, and that's getting takedowns and getting fights on the ground and getting submissions. I think that's what she does on Saturday night, and I'm taking Jillian Robertson to win the fight by second round submission. Go on to our next one here. We have got Peyton Talbott taking on Ghemmouri. Again, the odds, they are telling. Minus 1,600 for Peyton Talbott currently as of Saturday night. Ghemmouri coming back at you at plus 950. There's a reason the odds are like this. There are. Because this is a step down in competition for Peyton Talbott. Peyton Talbott goes from fighting a very credentialed guy and a 9-1 South African fighter training with and at the same camp as the middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis. I'm talking about Cameron Simon. Talbott goes from finishing him and looking absolutely dominant in the Simon fight and beating him in the second round to a fight against an 0-1 Ghemmouri, who it was kind of a question mark for me when he came into the UFC. Hadn't fought the best guys. I think his best win is Rashid Haas outside the UFC over in UAE Warriors. Rashid Haas is a guy fighting in PFL Mana now. He won his first fight with the PFL just a couple months ago. Actually, about a month ago now to this point. Actually, it's been about 2 months. But Ghemmouri is 0-1 in the UFC. One loss to William Gomez, where Gomez finished him in the third round with a body kick. But Gomez was well in control of that fight. Gomez was up 2-0, and he was on his way to win that third round as well. So Ghemmouri was just getting beat in that fight. This is a guy training out of France. He's got the Desert Warrior nickname. I am not completely sold on Peyton Talbott yet. I'll be completely honest with you. Again, I really liked what I saw in the Cameron Simon fight. The blitzes and the striking that he was able to show off against Simon in that fight was very impressive. Don't get me wrong. I'm not sold yet on him being a future top 15 guy, or not top 10 guy. I think it's more specific. Partially because it took him 3 rounds to beat Nick Aguirre, and I don't think Aguirre is very good. But still, you can't take away from a win. A win is a win, and he's 2-0 in the UFC. And again, this is not the fight that's going to prove to you that Peyton Talbott's a top 10 guy. He's going to look very good in doing so. I think the UFC kind of sees the potential in Peyton Talbott. Again, people will make the comparison to Sugar Sean O'Malley. Yeah, they're both at 135, and yes, they're both very big 135-pounders. They're very tall, and they kind of have the same build. You're going to see a lot of people compare Peyton Talbott to Sugar Sean. I am not willing to put that much hype on him just yet. Yes, he does kind of have the kind of factors that kind of can make you think that he will be a Sean O'Malley type. Again, I don't see it yet. I think he has the potential to be that, but I'm not completely sold as of yet on Peyton Talbott. But obviously, again, when you're getting that much respect from Las Vegas, you're getting minus 1600s. Obviously, you're destined for big things. Ghemmouri's coming back at you at plus 950. Peyton Talbott's going to run right through him. It's not going to be a close fight. What Peyton Talbott needs to do is what we are predicting him to do. Peyton Talbott by first round knockout. When you are that big of a favorite, obviously that is what is expected out of you. And I think he's going to do that. Talbott is, again, a up-and-coming star for the UFC. And Ghemmouri's a guy who's 0-1 who didn't look very good against William Gomez, who I don't think all that highly of. Right? And yes, Gomez does have wins in the UFC. He's, 3-0 in the UFC now. He hasn't been fighting recently. He's had 3 canceled fights back to back to back. Or just 2, because Ghemmouri was a replacement for his original fight in France last year against Lucas Almeida. But again, I'm not impressed with even the guy that Ghemmouri's lost to, and I understand Gomez is undefeated, but still. Talbott wins this fight by first round knockout. I think a good fight from here is actually Peyton Talbott, William Gomez. Both these guys are 3-0. Again, a lot of people think this, and I've said it before. William Gomez is a very weak 3-0 in the UFC. He's not impressed anybody. He has won fights, but yes, they have not been all that impressive, and the guys he have beat have not been the greatest. So let's test William Gomez. Let's give him Peyton Talbott, and sure, if Gomez, do it in France. Send Peyton Talbott to France, put it on the main card, Talbott and Gomez in September. There's your fight. Perfect. The winner of that fight, boom, there's your big prospect. And again, you're hoping it's Peyton Talbott, but hey, if Gomez does win, then all right, William Gomez is actually legit, and now you have a big French star who is 4-0 in the UFC beating Peyton Talbott. Don't get me wrong, Talbott would beat William Gomez, but I'd like to see it. Put it on the main card of the France card. But for now, we are taking Peyton Talbott again to beat Ghemmouri by first round knockout. To our next one here, should be a good fight, and we say this every single time Charles Jourdain fights, but in the featherweight division, my guy, Charles Jourdain, takes on Jean Silva. Should be a good one, again, because that's just kind of how Charles Jourdain fights. Now, lost to Sean Woodson in his last fight, back and forth fight. Woodson gets the nod, not against it at all. I'd pick Charles Jourdain to win the fight. Again, Woodson got the better of him in a split decision. I didn't think it was a split decision. I thought it was a pretty clear decision victory, 2-1 for Sean Woodson. I had him winning the first 2 rounds. But before that, for Jourdain, back-to-back wins over Kron Gracie, where Gracie looked horrible, and then a win over Ricardo Ramos after that, where he subbed him in the first round with a guillotine choke in the apex. He's taken on Jean Silva, who's 1-0 in the UFC with a first-round knockout victory over Weston Wilson. Okay, Weston Wilson's still a horrible striker. I don't care that he beat Jekka by triangle armbar in the first round in his last fight last week. I don't give a damn that happened. Okay, Weston Wilson still can't strike, and beating Weston Wilson does nothing for you. Well, it's a win. It gets you your win money, but it does nothing. It doesn't prove anything to me personally, okay? And yeah, Silva's win in the Contender Series is good. He beats a 13-0 guy at the time, an 11-0 guy at the time, who's now 13-1, and Kevin Vallejos. Vallejos, I would expect to see him again in the Contender Series. He's only 22 years old. I would expect to see him again this year. It's a good one for Jean Silva. He beats him by decision. Back and forth fight in the feet. Jean Silva ends up winning it. He loses the first round. He bounces back and wins the next 2. Okay. I feel like this is a tough matchup for him, though, against Charles Jourdain, because it's a step up. Again, we said it earlier about Vinicius Oliveira going from one fight, taking on a top 15 guy in Ricky Simone. Charles Jourdain has never really been that top 15 guy. He's always been one of those guys on the cusp of being in the top 15. Hell, Sean Woodson broke into the top 15 after beating Charles Jourdain. He's always been that top 20-ish type guy. I think that's a little bit too much for Jean Silva. Again, yeah, we're getting excited that he beat Weston Wilson by first round knockout, but a guy like Silva should be able to do that, and that's something that Jekka should have done last week. Silva was supposed to take on William Gomez in his last fight. Again, we just mentioned William Gomez and how I'd like to see him fight Talbott, and I picked Silva to beat William Gomez. I picked him to win the fight by first round knockout. That was supposed to happen in May. Not in May. Was it in May? Yeah, it was supposed to happen in May. In in Brazil on that Pantoja Urseg card. Again, Gomez couldn't make weight for that one. He got on the scales and looked horrible, so obviously that fight got pulled. Jean Silva, Charles Jourdain's an interesting fight, but I have to take the fighter from Quebec and from Canada. I'm taking Charles Jourdain to win the fight by decision. Again, I think it's a back and forth war on the feet. I think that's primarily where this fight does go. You might see Jean Silva look to mix it up a little bit with the wrestling because he does do that some, but I do like the grappling game at Charles Jourdain. I do like the defensive submissions he's able to throw up. Again, you look at the guillotine chokes that he's been able to pull off. He's gotten 2 of those so far in the UFC. One of Orlando Venata back in 2022, and his last victory again over Ricardo Ramos in September was by guillotine choke as well. So that's why I don't necessarily think that Silva will be, over eager to, get the fight in the ground, look for a submission. I do think we see a striking fight. And in a striking fight, yeah, Jean Silva has power. He has showed it. But Charles Jourdain has fought a lot of guys with power, and he's never been finished. So I don't think Jean Silva is just straight up able to beat him for 15 minutes on the feet. I do think Charles Jourdain does win 2 rounds, and I do think, again, he is able to win more moments in the feet than the Brazilian Jean Silva is able to do. So that's why we're picking Charles Jourdain to win the fight. Because when you just break it down, again, this is a guy who's had 13 professional fights, or 13 fights in the UFC, compared to Jean Silva, who's in his second. Everything to me points to a Charles Jourdain victory, because on the ground, I think this fight's neutralized. And on the feet, I do like Jourdain a lot, because I don't think Silva's able to knock him out. And, in a back and forth striking fight that Jourdain does typically tend to have, I do just think he's better on the feet than Jean Silva. So give me Charles Jourdain to win. As we go on now to our next one, we have got Cub Swanson taking on Andre Touchy Fili. And again, I feel like I have to talk about it because we talked about it with Andre Arlovski and we talked about it with Michelle Waterson-Gomez. Is this the last fight for Andre? Sorry, not for Andre Fili. For Cub Swanson, is it? I don't think it is, because Swanson has won 2 of 3, right? Win over Darren Elkins back in 2021, given that, that was in 2021. A loss to Jonathan Martinez in 2022, and then a win over Hakeem Dawodu by decision, where he probably lost the fight, but still he beats Dawodu in the Apex last year in August. There's no reason for Cub to go just yet. I understand, again, he's 40 years old, but Swanson's still very competitive in a lot of these fights, and he's still winning these fights at a decently high level. Not to say necessarily, I'm not saying just yet that he's going to beat Andre Fili, but Cub Swanson, I don't think has a reason to step away from the sport just yet. I still think he's got a lot to offer. Yes, fighting at 145 pounds at 40 years old is something, because it's not something you see done a lot. But I do still think Cub has some left in the tank. So I don't think this is his swan song, but maybe it is. Again, you get to a point where you just don't want to get punched in the face anymore. So maybe it is for Cub Swanson. We will see when it happens again on Saturday night. But when we look at this fight with him and Team Alpha Male's own Andre Fili, I do think it slightly does favor Fili. And I understand, Fili just got cracked in his last fight, and that was only 4 months ago to Dan Ige. He gets knocked out and he gets put out cold. So that is something that can play a factor in this fight. I just don't think that Cub Swanson has that big power that he once had, and Cub's never been that real power puncher. I mean, we saw it very early in his UFC run where he went on that big knockout streak. I mean, I remember when he knocked out Charles Oliveira, he beat Ross Pearson, right? He has a win, in there with Dustin Poirier as well. That was not a finish, but he went after that and beat Dennis Seaver by knockout. Like, again, Cub had a lot of big wins. He got it all the way to the point where he had a main event spot against Jeremy Stevens. He wins that. Then he, loses to Frankie Yeager in a main event by 5th round submission with like 4 seconds left in the round. But Cub really, again, you're not relying on Cub Swanson's power at this point of his career. And yeah, sure, he knocked out Darren Elkins, but that is a 40-year-old Darren Elkins that he finished 2 years ago. I'm not putting too much into that. So that's why, again, yes, Andre Fili was just knocked out 4 months ago, and Fili has always been that active guy who's been willing to step in the octagon and take a lot of fights on short notice and really with short layoffs. I'm not going to put too much in the fact that I think Fili's just going to get cracked and wobbled early by Swanson, just because Swanson's not that big power puncher. It does play a factor, because, again, it does play a factor in how much damage and how much, again, how many shots Fili can take in a fight like this. But I don't think it plays the biggest factor, because I do think Fili is still better. I do think Fili is the better striker. I do think Fili has more skills and more tools to win the fight, because let's just keep it how we think it's going to be. I think this is going to be a primary striking fight. I do think we see a lot of striking in this fight. I don't really see it hitting the mat, because, again, this is where both these guys want it to be. And yeah, Fili has been cracked before. Again, Joanderson Brito did it. Dan Ige has done it. Yair Rodriguez did it early in his UFC run as well. Fili can be cracked. I just don't think at 40 years old, Cub Swanson's going to be the guy that is going to, again, join those list of names to knock him out. I do think Fili is able to eat whatever Swanson does throw at him. And I think on the flip side of that, I do think Fili's able to implement his game on the feet and just outstrike Cub Swanson. So the pick for me is Andre Fili by decision. I would not be surprised in the slightest if Swanson wins. He is a very good underdog pick to pick on this card. Again, I just pick winners, and when I'm looking at winners, I like Fili to win this fight. I think Fili's quicker, and I really didn't think Cub won his last fight against Hakeem Dawodu. I think Fili, again, is just a faster fighter who has a lot more skills than Cub Swanson in the feet. And again, I didn't think Cub Swanson beat Hakeem Dawodu. He made it competitive, and I do think this fight will be competitive like the Dawodu fight was for Swanson, but I do just think Andre Fili does get the better of Cub Swanson. I do just think he beats him to the punch on every single exchange. So give me Andre Touchy Fili, again, fighting out of Sacramento, California, under Uriah Faber, over at Team Alpha Male. We are taking Andre Touchy Fili to win the fight by unanimous decision. As we go on to the prelim headliner here, we have got Joe Pyfer, Dana White's guy, be like Joe Pyfer, taking on Marc-Andre Barriault. Now, Joe Pyfer was disappointing in his last fight. He was disappointing. We can call it what it is. Pyfer's last fight was disappointing in a main event spot in the UFC Apex. And yes, it was in the Apex, but it was a disappointing result where he ended up losing the fight to Joe Pyfer. Or sorry, Joe Pyfer didn't lose to Joe Pyfer. Joe Pyfer lost to Jack Hermanson, right? It was disappointing. He was expected to win the fight. He was a pretty sizable favorite in that fight. I remember like the Tapology picks were like 95% to 5% in favor of Joe Pyfer over Jack Hermanson in that one. And he loses it, right? He looks good early, but in a 5-round environment, Hermanson turns the tide in the third round, wins the third, wins the fourth in the feet. The fifth round, he takes Pyfer down. He wins the fight on the ground in that fifth round. Jack Hermanson gets the nod on all three cards, 48-47. There is no controversy around that decision. That was a pretty obvious 3-2 for Hermanson. Pyfer now will turn it around against Marc-Andre Barriault, a guy who is more than willing to stand and trade with you in the pocket. Again, that was evident in his last fight at UFC 297 in Canada on that Strickland Duplessis card. It was evident, again, when Barriault lost to Chris Curtis. And Chris Curtis, I think, is a very good fighter in his own right. Marc-Andre Barriault is going to stand with you and strike. He does not want to grapple. That's not what he does. Again, he was the one on his back for the majority of the fight when he fought Anthony Hernandez back in 2022. When Hernandez was taking him down, he took him down 8 times in that fight. He ended up getting the submission in the third round. But that's not what Barriault wants to be on the feet. He wants to strike with you. He does not want to be in that type of fight that he was in with the Hernandez fight. And yeah, Marc-Andre Barriault's got power. He was able to knock out Julian Marquez in the second round, but it feels like now everyone's able to knock out Julian Marquez, so I don't really know how much really gets put in that at this point. The Eric Anders fight was a back and forth war at 289, again in Canada on a pay-per-view, one fight of the night. Marc-Andre Barriault got the better of Anders in that fight. But we're going to see a kickboxing fight in this one, and Joe Pyfer is just a better kickboxer than Marc-Andre Barriault. That's kind of the simplest way I can put it. I'm picking Joe Pyfer to win a striking fight against Marc-Andre Barriault. Marc-Andre Barriault probably 8 or 9 times out of 10. I just think he's better. I think, again, Pyfer's a longer fighter. He will have a reach advantage in this fight. Actually, not by much. You have a slight reach advantage, but still, I just think Pyfer has the crisper boxing. I do think I think he's more of a sniper in there. I just think Pyfer picks his shots better, and I do think he's going to find a way to crack that chin of Marc-Andre Barriault and just crack the guard. I think eventually, again, Pyfer is going to get the finish in the first round. We have seen Marc-Andre Barriault finish in the first before. Chidi and Njokuani did it in 16 seconds. I understand that is somewhat of an outlier in his career. It is the only time he's been finished on the feet. But again, it has been shown and it has been proven that Marc-Andre Barriault can be finished on the feet. And I think Joe Pyfer will do it similar, not as quick, I don't think, as Chidi and Njokuani did it, but I do think he will, again, line it up and eventually he will get that finish in the first round. I do think he will knock out Marc-Andre Barriault. And again, they put him in this featured prelim spot for a reason. They want eyes on Joe Pyfer, and that's what, again, the UFC does a lot on International Fight Week cards. Peyton Talbott is one of these guys on the undercard. And again, you've got the fighters who are potentially retiring on this card as well. They want eyes on Joe Pyfer. They're not giving up on the Joe Pyfer experience just yet. And again, that's still Dana White's guy from the Contender Series when Everyone on the card fought like crap, and Joe Pyfer went in there, got knocked out against Ozzy Diaz, and Dana White said, be like Joe Pyfer, and that was kind of the motto for the entire Contender Series season that year, 2 years ago now. But Pyfer is going to go out there and beat Marc-Andre Barriault. He will be power bar, and he will knock him out by first round. Again, he will snipe him to victory. Pyfer gets back on the winning ways by beating Marc-Andre Barriault by first round knockout. To the main card, Ian Machado Garry takes on Michael Venom Page. And no, Machado is not his nickname, like MVP's nickname is Venom. Ian Machado Garry, Machado is just his wife's name. That comes from her ex-husband. I think that, I don't know. Layla Machado Garry says it isn't, but I'm just going to run with the joke because it's funnier that way. Anyways, MVP Ian Garry, it's a good fight. It's a really good fight, and I'm really glad it's on the card because MVP looked good in his fight with Kevin Holland. It proved me wrong. Now, again, what I said going into that fight was Kevin Holland needs to grapple because I saw Logan Storley go in there and beat Michael Venom Page on the ground. I can see Kevin Holland doing the same exact thing and fishing for a submission because I know, again, it is in Kevin Holland's bag. He has grappling, he has jiu-jitsu, and he has submissions. We saw it in his fight in his last one against... I'm blanking on the guy he fought, Michal Zolshashak. We saw it, and I just wanted him to do that against MVP. And now, was Kevin Holland going to grapple with Zolshashak before Zolshashak dropped him? Probably not, but he ended up doing it. Now we have Ian Garry, though, and Michael Venom Page, and MVP impressed me a lot in that fight with Holland. He looked good, right? He made Holland miss a lot. Holland was frustrated because of the striking game of Michael Venom Page in that fight. Now you get him and Ian Machado Garry. I don't expect this one to hit the ground. We are going to get a pure striking fight. And call me crazy, I will give the pick away right now and I will talk about it. I'm taking Michael Venom Page to beat Ian Machado Garry. I'm taking him to win the fight by second round knockout. I've seen Ian Garry drop before. Song Ki-nan did it. Ian Machado Garry got rocked a couple times in his first UFC fight against Jordan Williams, right? Jeff Neal hit Ian Garry hard. Again, the fight wasn't the best, but, again, Neal had spots in that fight where he hit Ian Garry. I saw Ian Garry talking about this, and again, I'll be the first one to tell you I'm not the biggest Ian Garry fan, but I appreciated his realness when he was talking about taking the fight with MVP. He said originally he wanted the Colby Covington fight. Now, I don't know what's going on with Colby Covington. I still expect him to fight Charles Oliveira. I think that will happen. But if I would maybe think that would be on the Sphere, I don't know. Maybe a fight night main event, I don't know. But he said again, he was expecting it and he wanted the Colby Covington fight. He didn't get the Colby Covington fight. MVP sets him back a fight because regardless, Ian Garry still thinks he needs Colby next. That's the fight that he wants next to, again, bridge him into the top 3 of the weight class. So I appreciated him being completely honest about it, that this fight does nothing for him, but he's taking it because, again, he wants to fight on this card. And again, he wants to be the first guy to beat MVP in the UFC. I appreciate the realness. However, I just think MVP's a better striker. And I don't see this one hitting the ground. Yeah, Ian Garry's got power, but MVP is a good striker, and Kevin Holland's got power too. And he, didn't get hit all that often because MVP is a tough guy to hit, but he did, Holland did hit him with stuff, and MVP was able just to roll with the punches. I've never been the biggest MVP fan, I'll be honest with you. I thought he was heavily protected in Bellator. Even, prior to the first Douglas Lima fight and prior to the second Douglas Lima fight, he was very protected within Bellator. And whenever it felt like he fought a big name and a guy that was not a favorable matchup for him, he lost. Again, the first Lima fight and the Logan Storley fight for the interim championship, again, he lost those fights. And, Mike Perry beat him in bare knuckle as well. That's Mike Perry's league. He is the bare knuckle guy, whatever. Again, and yes, MVP was not able to kick in that fight. Again, it was just straight boxing. I watched MVP fight Gochi Yamuchi. I was there in person. It was a 20-second fight. Nothing much happened in that one. Again, it was a leg kick that finished the fight, and Yamuchi again couldn't continue. But again, MVP looked really good in the Kevin Holland fight. And yeah, Ian Garry's got power. He does. He's got power when he wants to go out there and finish a fight. But the last 2 performances for Ian Garry have been very lackluster. Yeah, he wins against Magny and Jeff Neal, but they aren't the type of fights that we saw on his way to the top. Song Ki-nan fight, yeah, he got dropped in that fight, but he came back and he won the fight by 3rd round finish. The fight that is the best win for Ian Garry in his career, I think, is the D-Rod fight. In Charlotte, he goes out there and finishes him in the 1st round. He was able to show that, okay, I can get finishes early against, Daniel Rodriguez is not a top 10 guy, but again, a guy who's been around and has given a lot of guys troubles. and he was able to finish D-Rod in the first. That was very impressive. I don't think he's able to finish Michael Venom Page, so what does Garry do? Because you're likely going to have to get into a somewhat of a technical striking bout against Michael Venom Page. That doesn't favor Ian Garry that much to me, I don't think. Because you don't want to fall into the trap and fall into MVP's game. And unfortunately, that's the only way Ian Garry fights. He fights, he's a striker. He can't mix it up with the wrestling. And that's where, again, I eventually think MVP will lose, is when he fights a better grappler and fights a better wrestler. Your examples, Logan Storley and Bellator. I don't think Ian Garry's able to beat him. I think you see a striking fight. I think it might not be the highest, it might not be the highest volume out of both these guys. There might not be the most action at times, but whoever lands that big shot first, because both these guys, again, are willing to wait and willing to counter, whoever lands that big shot first is going to win. I think it will be Michael Venom Page. I think MVP is able to keep his distance from Ian Garry too. Kind of similar to how Alexander Volkov did against Sergey Pavlovich. Pavlovich was always trying to close distance. He was always trying to get inside to land those big, hooks that he was able to do. He was able to finish Tai Tuivasa with that. He was able to finish Derek Lewis with that. Well, no, Volkov was able to use his kicks and use his range effectively to keep Pavlovich away. I think the same thing can happen in this fight with MVP and Ian Garry. He's got a 5-inch reach advantage. I think he's able to do that. I think he's able to keep distance, and I think he's able to get the finish against Ian Machado Garry in the second round. Give me Michael Venom Page by second round TKO finish over Ian Machado Garry, the first guy to beat Ian Garry. And my goodness, it puts MVP in a tremendous spot in the rankings. Ian Garry currently the number 7 ranked guy. You would have to assume MVP goes up to number 7. I think, again, if Colby Covington's not fighting Charles Oliveira, he should fight the winner of this fight. If not, MVP and Wonderboy is likely the next fight they do. It keeps him away from a wrestler, and it's a very fun fight. But if Ian Garry wins again, it should be Colby Covington. We will see what happens, though. I'm taking Michael Venom Page to beat Ian Machado Garry, and we are taking him to get it done by TKO in the second round. We go from all these crazy fights to this, the bantamweight division. Mario Bueno Silva taking on Macy Chiasson. It is a cool-down fight, and I don't understand why it's on the main card. I understand Mario Bueno Silva is coming off of a world championship fight in her last fight, and one of the worst world championship fights I've ever watched. And now she's fighting Macy Chiasson. I don't really care about this fight. I'll be completely honest with you. I will still give you a winner, because I still watch the sport. And this is going to be a fight that I will, I'm not going to care too much about when I'm watching this pay-per-view next week. It's just, we start on such a high, Ian Garry and MVP, and we go to this. Because Mario Bueno Silva laid an egg in her last fight. She was expected to beat Raquel Pennington and to become the world champion. And by the end of that fight, Raquel Pennington wasn't just beating her on the feet, she was beating her on the ground as well. Mario Bueno Silva had 1 round, and she gassed and looked horrible after that. Now she gets Macy Chiasson. I'm not denying that Mario Bueno Silva's got a really good jiu-jitsu game. It's just when she fights a very good wrestler, and I don't even think that Raquel Pennington is the best wrestler, but when she fights a good wrestler, I think she loses. I think the blueprint to beat Mario Bueno Silva is completely out there now. It just is. Holly Holm should have went in there and just straight wrestled her, but she didn't. Right? The blueprint to beat Mario Bueno Silva is out now. Can Macy Chiasson go out there and straight wrestle her? She has done it before. Like, she's been able to, out-grapple Norma Dumont, but I don't really think she's gonna do it. I actually think Mario Bueno Silva wins the fight. I think Mario Bueno Silva wins a boring decision. I think she wins the first 2 rounds, she gasses the third, but she still has enough to win the fight. Again, the gas tank out of Mario Bueno Silva is very concerning. Again, she was not conditioned at all for a world championship fight. And by the way, right, the bantamweight champion of the world is Raquel Pennington. She won the fight in January to win the championship. Mario Bueno Silva's back by now, right? Driguez Duplessis, who won the world championship that night, is booked for August. Sean Strickland, who lost the world championship that night, has fought since. He fought in May. Where's Raquel Pennington? You are the world champion and you don't fight. She wants to fight, 4th quarter 2024. What are we doing? Go out there, fight Juliana Pena, get the weight class going, and then whoever wins that fight can go lose to Kayla Harrison. Okay? This fight, though, I simply don't care that much. Bueno Silva wins. I could see her winning by submission. I could also see Macy Chiasson just wrestling Bueno Silva and just out cardioing her going into the second and the third. But I do think Shitara, that's her nickname, Bueno Silva, does win. I do think she goes out there and I think she wins by decision. I think she just uses top positioning to her advantage. I think she will threaten with chokes, but I don't think she'll get that. I'm taking Bueno Silva to win a boring decision, and then by the time that fight's over, you're like, okay, why was that in the main card? Exactly. We're all just going to be like, oh, and it's over. Great. Don't care. Myro Bueno Silva wins. Don't know where she goes in the weight class after this. But again, simply, I can't preface it enough. I just don't care. Myro Bueno Silva wins by decision. The bantamweight division is very boring. It just is. And again, it doesn't help when you have a champion who doesn't fight. And the champions were Quell Pennington. The champions were Quell Pennington. What happened to the sport I love? What happened to it? What happened to it? It makes you question again. Life just makes you question the things you love in life. And makes you question a lot of things. And the UFC is one of them sometimes. Anyways, let's go back to the fun fights. And this fight's not like entirely fun, but you know, Anthony Lionheart-Smith is fighting Roman Dolidze. Okay, again, originally supposed to be Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree Jr. Okay, Roundtree pops for PEDs. I think it was PEDs. It was some drug. Cool. That turns into Carlos Ulberg, Jamal Hill. And I'll tell you my pick on every single step of the way in all these fights, okay? But we'll start, again, that goes to Ulberg Hill. Hill drops out, it becomes Smith Hill, and now it becomes Smith Dolidze. And Dolidze is coming up from 185 to fight at 205 for the first time. Okay, I will tell you my progression of picks as we go on here. So originally, Roundtree Hill. It's actually going to take Khalil Roundtree Jr. Again, my big thing with Jamal Hill was, why are you fighting so soon after being knocked out? There's no reason to fight that quickly, okay? But then it went to Ulberg Hill. I thought Ulberg was going to beat him. Went to Ulberg Smith. I was going to take Ulberg. And now here we are with Smith Dolidze. Roman Dolidze showed in his last fight against Nasruddin Imavov, he's not very good. And I don't think it was Imavov being all that great. I think Imavov's good, obviously. I think, again, the stoppage with Cannonier was horrible, but obviously you have to be good enough to the point where you can get to that spot where there is even a questionable decision, right, against Jared Cannonier. Jared Cannonier is very good. Sure, he's coming off knee surgery, and he's 40 years old now, but that is still a good fighter, right? Jared Cannonier is still a very good fighter. And Nasruddin Imavov did well in that fight, and Imavov did well against Dolidze too, sure. But Dolidze looked horrible in that fight. It was 5 rounds. This one's obviously going to be 3 against Lionheart. But man, he just got beat. Like, it was just bad. I don't know how one judge had it a draw. It was a horrible fight for Dolidze. He doesn't do anything on the feet in that fight. Yeah, he wrestles. But other than that, he doesn't do anything. He does not do anything other than just positioning with wrestling. How does he beat Anthony Smith? People are picking Dolidze to win by knockout. I don't see it. Yeah, Smith's chin is horrible. I simply just don't see him doing that. Again, short notice. I understand it's short notice for both these guys, but Smith has been, preparing for a fight for at least a week longer than Roman Dolidze. Roman Dolidze is a 185-pounder. Yeah, he's a big 185, or he's 6'2", but still he's coming up a weight class. He's only 6-3 in the UFC. He's coming off back-to-back losses to Nasruddin Imavov and Marvin Vettori. Sure, did he beat Vettori? That's arguable. Again, that you can make the case that he won that fight. But yeah, I think it's... I don't know. The odds, Dolidze's a favorite. I don't see it. I really don't. I think Anthony Smith wins. I'll say it right now. I think Anthony Smith goes out here and wins the fight. How does he win the fight? I don't think he can submit Dolidze, because Dolidze does have a decent wrestling game. I don't think the submission's going to be there for him. I think Smith wins I think he wins a back and forth decision. I think Dolidze will trade with him on the feet. I think Dolidze will shoot for takedowns. I honestly think that Anthony Smith will be able to stuff some of those takedowns. Obviously, he's going to threaten with the guillotine choke like he did against Vitor Petrino, and he ended up getting the finish against, again, Vitor Petrino in Brazil at UFC 301 in May. But I do think Smith is able to fight well enough in terms of the wrestling, because that's going to be Dolidze's strong suit in this fight. It's going to be with his wrestling, because everywhere else, I think Anthony Smith... Again, it's crazy to think. I think Anthony Smith beats him on the feet. I think the big a big component in this fight and a big deciding factor for Lionheart Smith will be if he can get out that first round with Roman Dolidze. It's super important that he gets out that first round because that's where Dolidze's at his best in terms of his striking, right? You look at his 2 back-to-back knockout wins, first round knockout wins in the UFC. Kyle Dawkins, he did it in a minute, and then he did it against Phil Hawes in 4 minutes, right? That's where Dolidze is at his best, is in the first round. And if you're Anthony Smith, you got to know that, and you got to think, okay, if Roman Dolidze wins the first round, we're okay with that. Because you know this guy's going to start to tire, you know he's going to start to fade, and Anthony Smith can then put his, implement his game plan against Roman Dolidze. It should be just to go in there and straight strike and out volume the guy. Because again, Dolidze is not a volume striker. He's looking for that one big shot. If Smith can get in his face and just overwhelm Roman Dolidze, I think he wins. I really think he does. Anthony Smith has been around for forever, but believe it or not, him and Roman Dolidze are the same exact age. They are both 35, and believe it or not, Roman Dolidze is 2 weeks older than Anthony Smith as well, which is crazy. Anthony Smith has had a million fights. This is walk number, again, I'll try to do math really quickly. This is going to be walk number 58 in Anthony Smith's professional mixed martial arts career. And I will put it out there, because it's a thing. If Jiri Prochazka slips on a banana peel or trips over a cord like Tony Ferguson does and can't fight Alex Pereira this Saturday night in the main event, your main event will be Alex Pereira and Anthony Smith for the World Championship. Say it how it is. Anthony Smith has been calling for this fight for a very long time. I don't think he'll get it. I think Prochazka will fight a Saturday night. But Anthony Smith is going to be a middleweight, and he's going to call out Alex Pereira for the World Championship. Will he get it? I don't think so. Magomed Ankalaev is still waiting. Dana White said that Ankalaev... I think at the press conference in Saudi Arabia, Dana kind of hinted that Ankalaev is going to have to fight again because he said he's going to have to keep his ranking and then eventually he will get a title shot. The fight to make, I think, is Ankalaev and Jan Blachowicz, the rematch. I think that should be the fight because, again, Blachowicz took Pereira to a split decision. That should be the fight. We'll see. Carlos Ulberg's around, but he's hurt now. And, of course, you do have Volkan Oezdemir now rising the ranks. I think Oezdemir's fight, though, should be Jamal Hill. That makes a lot of sense. And Lord knows where Nikita Krylov is at this point, right? Rakic is coming off a loss. We'd like to see Rakic, I think, against Roundtree when Roundtree comes back. But, yeah. Anthony Smith is going to call out a title fight. He's not going to get it. I think he'll be waiting. Who knows what he will actually get. Maybe he'll luck his way into a title fight. I don't know. But I do think Anthony Smith beats Roman Dolidze. Again, it's a matter. It's just, I think he gets in Dolidze's face. I think he, is uber, careful in that first round. You get into the second or third, just get into a guy's face, Roman Dolidze, who does not like to trade. He likes to look for that one big punch to put a guy out. Again, if Smith can just get in his face and overwhelm him, I think Lionheart does win. Believe it or not, we are taking Anthony Lionheart Smith to win on the main card here of UFC 303. We're taking him to beat Roman Dolidze by unanimous decision. Co-main event, Brian Ortega taking on Diego Lopes. I don't care what anyone says. This is an insanely crazy step up in competition for Diego Lopes. It just is. And yeah, you're thinking, all right, he's fought Movsar Evloev in his first fight in the UFC. I understand that. But from the guys that Lopes has beat recently to going to T-City Brian Ortega, that's a lot. He's going from beating Gavin Tucker, Pat Sabatini, and Sodiq Yusuff to a guy who's fought for the belt twice, who's only lost to Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski, and who got injured against Yair Rodriguez. And oh, by the way, his last fight, he just beat Yair Rodriguez. That's T-City Brian Ortega. This is an insanely tough fight for Diego Lopes. And the odds are showing, all right, Lopes is the favorite. Minus 150 come back at you for Ortega, plus 125. You look at picks on Tapology, 72% of voters going with Lopes compared to 28 going with Brian Ortega. I get the hype on Lopes. I really do. Again, uber talented prospect. He is quickly rising the ranks in the featherweight division. The bantamweight division. Featherweight division. What am I talking about? In the featherweight division, right? He submits Gavin Tucker in a minute. He knocks out Pat Sabatini. He drops Sodiq Yusuff twice under 90 seconds and ends up getting the finish as well. I get it. I get all that with Diego Lopes. I just think Brian Ortega is a very tough guy to do that against. And especially after you look at what he did in his last fight in Mexico against Yair Rodriguez, right? That first round is the worst possible round Brian Ortega could have had. Gets absolutely dominated. You You look at the significant strike count in that first round. Yair Rodriguez, 45 significant strikes, compared to Brian Ortega's 6. Rodriguez gets a knockdown in that round. Ortega is going to take down, but still, Rodriguez dominates that first. The second round, it flips. Ortega is able to get the takedown. He ends up winning that second round. He wins the third round again, or he's on his way to win the third round again. He gets the submission after he gets a takedown. That's something that's going to be incredibly huge in this fight, and that's ultimately where I think this fight comes down to. It does come down to the striking too, but also it's just, can Ortega get Lopes down? And then what happens once Ortega does get Lopes down as well? Because you look at Lopez's loss in the UFC, it's to Movsar Evloev. Evloev takes him down 4 times. He goes 4 of 7 on his takedown attempts. He's got 8.5 minutes of control. He gets a takedown in every single round. That's how he wins 2 of 3. You give the first round maybe to Diego Lopes just because Evloev doesn't do the most with his work on the ground. Okay. Brian Ortega has to follow somewhat of that same game plan to beat Diego Lopes in this fight. On the feet, I think it's a very close fight. People forget that Brian Ortega can strike. They do. It's just been the inactivity out of Ortega which makes people forget, right? I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I picked Rodriguez to beat him in Mexico earlier this year just because it had been 2 years since he had fought, but he comes back and he wins and he looks good doing so, right? Everything that could have gone wrong for Brian Ortega early in that fight went wrong. During the intros, when Bruce Buffer is announcing, the fighters, Brian Ortega jumps, he rolls his ankle. You're thinking, well, all right, he's done. He has no mobility. Well, he looks decent as the fight goes on with his footwork. He ends up going in there and he ends up getting the submission, right? Everything starts to go wrong early in that fight. He gets knocked down early in the fight. He gets dominated on the feet early in the fight, but he still goes out there and wins, right? The Yair fight, the first one on Long Island, he hurts his shoulder. The Volkanovski fight, he has him very close a couple times on a couple submissions. Can't get the finish on both the triangle and the guillotine choke. But don't forget, again, the striking game out of Ortega. Don't forget the knockout he got against Frankie Edgar. I understand that's 5 years ago now, but still, the big uppercut that puts Frankie Edgar down at UFC 222. Don't forget about the 5-round domination of Chan Sung Jung on Fight Island back in 2020. The fight turned when he landed that spinning elbow and really just altered the rest of the fight, where the zombie really just could not get going after that. Ortega still has a striking game. I understand Lopes is good at it as well. Lopes is quick. He's got power. I get that. But just don't forget who Brian Ortega is as well. And that's why I'm taking T-City to win the fight. I'm taking Brian Ortega to go out here. And I think Ortega does win the fight by decision. I think it's back and forth. I think it's a really good fight. I don't think Lopes is able to knock Brian Ortega out. Again, Brian Ortega's ate so much damage, and I don't think Lopes is able to knock him out. It took a doctor stoppage after 4 rounds of beating to where eventually he was out of there against Max Holloway. That's the only time he's ever been finished by TKO. The other time is again the injury to Yair, but that doesn't count, right? Other than that, TC's a tough guy to put away. He really is. And I don't think Diego Lopes is able to do that. On the ground, I get Diego's got really good BJJ, but is it better than Brian Ortega's? I'm going to say no. I think Brian Ortega's got the better BJJ. And I think Brian Ortega gets this fight down. I think he puts Lopes in a lot of tough spots. I don't think he gets the submission, but I do think Brian Ortega wins this fight. I think it's a mixture of people underrating Brian Ortega's striking at this point of his career, and also the wrestling and the grappling he's able to do as well. I like Diego Lopes, don't get me wrong, but I just think this matchup favors T-City. I'm going with Brian Ortega to beat Diego Lopes. He's going to get it done by decision. I think he wins 2 of 3. I think Lopes will get around, but I think Brian Ortega wins. It is interesting that Ortega is talking about going up to lightweight, 155 pounds, regardless of the outcome in this fight. So I guess we're not going to see him and a guy like Aljamain Sterling. Hey, there are fights for him at 155 pounds. I don't know. Mateusz Gamrot still needs a fight at 155. That could be a fight easily. Ortega goes up, give him Gamrot, immediately throw him into the top 5, see what happens, especially coming off a victory over a hyped-up prospect like Diego Lopes. But in this fight, I'm going with Brian T-City Ortega to beat Lopes by unanimous decision as we go on to the main event for the light heavyweight championship of the world. Again, is their rematch. Jiri Prochazka, the former world champion, taking on the 2-division champion, Alex Poatan Pereira. It's interesting this fight's already rebooked. It's like the fact that they're already getting a rematch for this fight. Considering we just saw it less than a year ago. Both these guys have only fought once since then. And there wasn't much controversy around the first fight. It was pretty, apparent what happened in that first fight. I thought Prochazka did probably win the first round. But again, Pereira got the nod and ended up knocking him out in the second. There was no early stoppage. Prochazka said it himself that he thought the stoppage was fine. So there's no controversy. It's just the fight's happening again. And sure, Prochazka beats Alexander Rakic recently. Good for him. Pereira beats Jamal Hill. They both won. Now here we are. The fight that this should be Magomed Ankalaev and Alex Pereira, but I understand why the UFC's not going to that. It's because, again, Ankalaev's not a name. He's not all that exciting, but he's got the best chance in this division right now to beat Pereira. And the UFC does not want Pereira to get beat. Hell, I don't want Pereira to get beat. I want Pereira to keep winning. I want him to continue this legacy that he's been building in MMA. We'll see when, again, Ankalaev does eventually get that world championship fight and shot, if he ever gets it. But my question to you watching this video is, what has changed since the original Prochazka-Pereira fight? It just happened in November. That's not that long ago. It literally just happened. And now we're running it back. I think Prochazka's good. I just don't think he can beat Pereira. Because Prochazka, yeah, he did wrestle in that first fight a little bit, but he's not going to go back to that well over and over and over again. And Pereira's been in so many fights with guys who have had the capability of taking him down. So Pereira has been working on this. And Pereira is not going to be a walk in the park on the ground like we once thought he was, or maybe what he somewhat was back when he made his UFC debut against Michailidis, when he fought Adesanya, when he fought Blakovic. He's always going to be evolving now as a wrestler and a grappler. It's not just as easy now as just, okay, take him down, you can win a fight. And that's not what Prochazka does, and that's not what he's especially good at. So again, Prochazka will strike with him, and I think Pereira chins him, and I think he does it faster than the first fight was. I'm taking Alex Pereira to knock out Jiri Prochazka in the first round. I give it 3.5 minutes, and Pereira gets the finish. Prochazka took some damage in the Rakic fight. He did. He really did. And yeah, a lot of it was leg kicks, but still, Rakic landed some blows on Prochazka that did stun him a little bit. And he's already turning it around less than 3 months later against a guy who is a sniper, but also hits like a truck in Alex Pereira. It is difficult, I think, for Jiri Prochazka. Again, originally this fight was supposed to be in August. It was supposed to be in Australia. Maybe a different story because Prochazka's chin is all the way back then. But still, I would think Pereira would win. Pereira didn't eat anything from Jamal Hill, really. Hill barely landed anything in that fight. And mostly what Jamal Hill landed were leg kicks. That's not going to play too much of a factor in this fight. Another thing, Alex Pereira, he will kick the hell out of your legs. Well, that's basically all Alexander Rakic did against Jiri Prochazka, and he did it a lot. 2 months is not a long time to fully let your legs recover. I don't think it's going to play too much of a factor. It's not obviously as big of a factor as the chin will be, just in general. But still, that fight with Rakic was a 2-round war and a very good fight on the UFC 300. It was the prelim headliner. It was a very good fight. And that was only 2.5 months ago. And now you gotta fight Alex Pereira? All of this aside, I'd still take Alex Pereira. But all of this, again, being added onto this fight just makes me even more confident that Poatan's gonna win this fight. Again, we are picking Alex Pereira to beat Jiri Prochazka, and he's gonna get it done in the first round. I think he's gonna land a left hook. That's how he's won his last 2 fights. That's how he knocked out Sean Strickland. That's how he did against Prochazka the first time. I just think he does it faster. Prochazka's a wild man, but it will leave, again, like the first fight, it leaves opportunities and it leaves spots for him to get hit. and that's where Alex Pereira will take advantage. He's a very smart fighter. He is a very patient fighter who is willing to pick his spots, and he's going to do exactly that to Jiri Prochazka on Saturday night. International Fight Week, Las Vegas, Nevada. Alex Pereira gets it done. He will knock out Jiri Prochazka again, and he will do it by first round knockout. And still world champion Alex Pereira. What a legacy he is building in the UFC. 8-1 with a victory here against Prochazka. 11-2 as a professional. Again, already one of the greatest of all time, Alex Pereira. You gotta think he's thinking of heavyweight, but unfortunately that division is just backed up right now with Jones waiting for Miocic. Miocic waiting for Jones technically. We're just waiting for that fight. I don't think Pereira can go up to heavyweight just yet. I would anticipate him fighting Magomed Ankalaev, but he also said, Pereira said, which this is a long layoff for him, he would like to wait till December to fight next. That's fine. In the meanwhile, get us a fight between Blachowicz and Ankalaev quickly so we can turn that winner around against Pereira right away in December. If Blachowicz is still hurt, give us a Magomed Ankalaev Anthony Smith rematch. I hate to say it, but that's really the only other fight we can do considering where everyone else is at the weight class right now. Volkan Oezdemir is an outside shot too, but you could also do this. You could do Ankalaev just with the guys that are available right now because Hill's injured. Rakic coming off a loss. Krylov, where is he? I don't know. Walker just got chinned. Roundtree suspended, right? Olberg's injured. These are the fights you can make with the guys that are available. Prochazka loses to Pereira. Obviously, Pereira is the champion. You have Magomed Ankalaev fight, I don't know the tip of my tongue. He fights Jan Blachowicz. Okay, fight night main event. Co-main event, Anthony Smith and Volkan Oezdemir, their rematch. You have 2 rematches on the card. You can, hype the entire card around 2 light heavyweight rematches. Whoever makes a statement and an impact will get Pereira in December in Vegas. That's what I would do if I was the UFC. We'll see what happens. But again, I think Alex Pereira goes up there and knocks out Jiri Prochazka, and we just wait to see who comes out of that as the next contender. I would anticipate it being Magomed Ankalaev, but I wouldn't put it past the UFC to put on a little funny fight with Anthony Smith and Alex Pereira next, just because both guys have been calling for it. We will see, but for now, folks, we are going with Poatan Alex Pereira to defend his world championship successfully by first round knockout against Jiri Prochazka. So folks, thank y'all for watching our UFC 303 predictions here on the channel. Make sure to hit that subscribe button down below if you did enjoy the video. Make sure to like the video as well if you did enjoy as well. And make sure to comment if you do disagree with any of the picks. We've got a week off next week for UFC, and then we'll be back the week after for UFC Fight Night Denver, Macy Barber, Rose Namajunas in the main event. And then we will have PFL coming at you tomorrow as well. So a week off from MMA, but of course tomorrow, come back to the channel for PFL 6 from, I believe, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Again, Brandon Lafnane and Justin Gonzalez in the main event. So folks, thank you for watching. Make sure to hit that subscribe button down below for more. And Mamba forever.